today we do get to sit in that celebration and think about all the women that came before us and helped, blaze the trail for where we are today. I want to say thank you to everyone for being here. And I hope that we, take a moment to appreciate all the barriers that we've overcome to be sitting in this room today. But I'd also like to reflect on the women that did not have the opportunity to sit here with us. Some who looked around and decided that it wasn't for them. Some of them who were forced out of it politically, socially, economically. So absolutely, let's celebrate all of us. I'm so excited to hear about some really big players in STEM, but also I would like to reflect on the women that we couldn't have their voices here today. So let's keep that door wide open, and let's be excited to hold it for as many people to enter into this world of science as possible. So with that, let's get started. Would you each mind giving a brief introduction of your name, maybe what you do, and then maybe your home city that you grew up in? You want to kick us off?
Hi, thanks so much for having me here. It's great to be back at my alma mater. I did my PhD in biochemistry at McGill. I'm originally from Ottawa. Joëlle Pelletier, I'm a professor now of chemistry at Université de Montréal. I'm affiliated with biochemistry, and I hold the Canada Research Chair in Engineering of Applied Proteins.
So I'm Elisa Pigney. I'm actually from Toronto, so don't hate me for that one. I hear a lot of, I did my graduate work, my graduate studies at University of Calgary. And so I left Toronto to explore other parts of the country. And then I ended up in other countries to do my postdoc work in Austria and also in Chicago in the United States. Came to Concordia, and then now I'm actually a professor in biology. My background is biochemistry and molecular biology. And I also am an associate dean for the School of Health.
Lakshmi Krishnan. So I did my grad studies way back in India, actually, and moved to Canada about 30 years ago for my postdoc fellowship at University of Alberta, and then moved on to NRC for research career more than 2 decades ago. I'm currently Vice President for Life Sciences at the NRC, which that means is that I'm looking at research just not in my area, but also the whole of life sciences from human health therapeutics, medical devices, marine and crop resources. My own research expertise is in the area of vaccine development and immunology, and that was my PhD, and much of my research career was in that, right? And 2019 was very focused on that.
So hi, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this interesting discussion. My name is Janice Bailey. I am right now the I'm the Vice President of Research and Scientific Director for the Fonds de Recherche du Québec and the sector of Natural Technology, so the STEM side of everything. I am actually from Manitoba, from a town called Brandon. That explains my glamour. Brandon. And I did my graduate work in University of Manitoba and Guelph. And then I did postdoc in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania. And my area was actually reproductive biology. I was known for many, many years as a sperm lady. That is what I worked on. We looked at sperm, how fertilization happened to address questions of contraception and infertility, other than just basic cell biology, as well as basic cell biology. And we were able to, I worked with all kinds of animals, farm animals, but I was also appointed, so I became a professor for 25 years at Laval University in agriculture with a cross appointment in medicine, because we also looked at the effect of the environment on reproduction and the changing environment. So it's been since 2019 that I was appointed at Fonds de Recherche du Québec. So a big shift from being a professor for many years to this.
Great. Well, it's so impressive to hear what you all do. I think maybe we're sitting on this side of all of your accomplishments. So maybe to create a little bit of connection between us in grad school and all of your accomplishments, maybe you could each share like 2 or 3 stories of how your PhD experience was. We can start with Lakshmi.
Yeah, sure. So I was very fortunate. Like, as I said, I did my PhD in India, in New Delhi. And at the time, immunology was just kind of coming up as its own field. Prior to that, perhaps in most institutions across the world, immunology was like a subset of either biochemistry or microbiology or something like that. And I was very fortunate that at the time, India invested in a full institute only for immunology, so it was called the National Institute of Immunology. it only had a grad program. So you applied for it, and if you got selected, about 12 to 15 students per year got selected to the grad program, then you were part of this research institution, which was of course affiliated to the university, but pretty much its own campus. So it was a different experience because we had the labs and the residences right all on campus. The staff quarters were on campus, so the staff lived around in the same area. So it was a very unique environment where and some of the best times in grad studies, because you're really very passionate about what you're doing, but you've got the opportunity to be right all the time stimulated by people who were just as you passionate about that area of research. So there was a lot of opportunity to work in the lab at any time you wanted. You could just walk in, you could go across and ask somebody else another question, and no problem, because they were right on campus. You could even knock at the door and ask them, I have a gel running and what do I do? It doesn't, should I stop it now or not? So I think it was a really, really unique opportunity to do that. Wonderful memories in terms of making friendships, lifelong friendships. I met my spouse there, so and many of us right now that actually graduated in those years. So the one thing was at the time when we graduated, there was not a lot of opportunity for us to stay back because again, immunology was nascent, and so we left India at the time. And now that field flourishes even there. So we all right now, the fortunate thing of that is that I actually have grad students that I went to school with that are distributed all over the world, and they're all in very interesting positions. So I think that itself is a nice network you can rely on. So the one message I'd say that grad studies and the time that you spend in grad school is perhaps the best network you will create for yourself. So meet as many as other grad students as you can, because you never know when your paths will cross. And later in life, these would be the same people that you might be knocking on their door for some collaboration that you may want to do.
It's cool to hear that you made this connection due to proximity, but then you maintained it as well. Joelle, do you want to?
Sure. So it's something that you're alluding to that is a big shift, a big change, is how communications works. And so the friendships and connections that we developed during our PhDs were also part of the fact that there was no internet yet.
Yes.
And there was no social media. And so, while you're running that gel, you'd kind of walk over to the lab next door and hang out, make plans and ask questions. You wouldn't be, communicating with someone somewhere else. And a memory I have from my PhD here in biochemistry at McGill is my advisor, at 10 a.m. he'd strut out of his office, and 5 minutes later he'd be back with his 3 pieces of mail tucked under his arm. Those were his communications for the day. So this whole environment that we have now, it's changed so much. But so during the PhD, Peter Pawlik, who was my lab mate, who's now a professor at Concordia, he proudly walked in 1994 and said, "Hey, I just got an email address." he said, "You should get one too." And I said, "Who would I write to?" So it was all such a different environment. So now the opportunities for networking, I think, are just entirely different. And I think it's important, though, to make those connections and make, the meaningful ones that you'll be able to tap into later on in life. It really is it's very rich to have that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would echo the sentiments of my colleagues here. I made the most of my graduate school experience. I was in faculty of medicine. We were a little bit isolated from the rest of the university. So it's almost like we were our own little institution or island, if you will. And the same kind of thing where we all kind of got to know each other, whether you're in department of biochemistry or immunology. And then, so you could form these connections with each other. It was our socializing platform as well as our research interaction platform. I got involved with things like helping to organize conferences. I wanted to sort of build some leadership aspects to what I was doing because I had a sense that I wanted to continue in academia, and leadership is very important. It also gave me opportunity to start networking outside, of course, my core group and to start interacting with those who are in already becoming known in their respective fields, right? Because we're now inviting them for talks, for hosting them. So that was a really great experience. I had a wonderful mentor, by the way. And I think mentorship and having somebody who can continue to lift you up is really important. And so you should be getting the most out of that relationship with your supervisor, and hopefully, if not from them, from your committee, who is also there to support you during your graduate school experience. So I think those things that I built early on, I've carried with me, and I use in my own sort of lab as I mentor my own students as well.
It's awesome. We are big proponents of mentorship here, so
Yeah.
thank you for showing that out.
So just to, because I think it's good to have a timestamp on some of us. So we all, yeah, so I finished, so I'm 60, just so that you know, okay, just so that that gives you an assessment of what, you know, what I lived is not what you'll be living, okay? And my job search is not gonna be the same as yours. So we have to clarify that. And so, but what they said, I never even thought about. So when I think about my PhD years, they were very, very fun, okay? So a couple of things. I had, and still to this day, struggle with, it's easy, way easier now, struggle with imposter syndrome. Okay, so yeah, so, and it's crazy, we could talk about that for ages and how we overcame that and things like this, but, so that was one thing. When I was very shy, and no, not shy, but I didn't have a vision of my career. I didn't have a vision of doing graduate work. I just kind of got on that train, that academic train, and it was comfortable for me. And I just kept going. And so when my master's advisor went from Winnipeg to Guelph, she asked me to go too. So I did. And so that was probably the biggest thing she probably did for me, as well as help me through my PhD. And I don't want to say anything really negative, but she was not a great mentor. She, you know, I feel that I was a much better mentor for her, or probably I did more for her career than she did for me in a funny way, but that's okay. That's okay, because I was in a very, very powerful at the time postdoc lab. So that was okay. But my PhD years were fun. They were very fun. And like, I never thought about the social media thing. Like when I think about the friends that I still have this weird connection for, Guelph had a large, very large faculty of agriculture, and we didn't even have a medical school on campus, so it was kind of big. The vet school and the ag school were kind of big there. And when I was a PhD, we were in offices of 6 students, and we all got everybody's mail, and we had one phone. So we were taking the messages. And so when my postdoc advisor called and left a message for my friend Helen, with whom I still connect, and she's been working all over the world with the World Bank and things like this. She actually hosted my postdoc advisor when she lived in Kenya for a while. So it's crazy how these things go, but I have very positive and very fun memories of my PhD years. And I definitely am in contact with many of those people. Another thing that I think that my particular experience to help me really appreciate collaboration, like you say, and also interdisciplinary relationships. So in agriculture and animal science in particular, people are super strong in statistics, okay? Like the geneticists were crazy, okay? And so there I am, like, you know, my first email address, or, you know, working on a computer that I can hardly understand. But I had all these other people next to help us get things going. And a bonus of being in agriculture, it wasn't in our faculty, but next door, there was actually people doing research on ice cream bars. So that is how my husband managed to really catch my eye. When I'd be working at the microscope late at night, I'd be in the lab late, but he would bring me ice cream bars, and that's how he managed to.
Good man.
Good ice cream. Imagine doing research on ice cream sandwiches. Anyways, so, but they're very, very positive memories for me, and those connections have persisted.
You guys are bringing so much, and I just want to take a second because there's so many good things in all of that. First, I didn't even ask them to say this. Networking, community, come to the CGSS Valentine's Day event. I thank you so much for your candor, Janice. I think it's so true that, and mentioning, get the most out of your mentorship experience, but sometimes we don't always have that, and so you have to seek different connections. You almost preempted my next question, touching on maybe a little bit on the imposter syndrome. I think graduate studies and working towards your degree is very cool, and you become an expert in something so specific, but sometimes that alienates you from maybe even in your lab, but definitely in your personal life. How would you say you guys managed still maintaining a community within academia, but also maybe more in your personal life, to kind of deal with that alienation as you become more of an expert, but that takes you a little bit away from other people? So maybe we can start on this side, which is
I think anyways, speaking for me, but I'm 57, so that generation, the community was the lab. It was really, I mean, I've heard a few mentions of meeting your husband there. Yeah, he was the roommate of my lab mate, I mean, of course. So it was, but I think we were more social within our building or between. We would just hang out because we didn't have anything else to do. I mean, there was the lab computer, and it was in the boss's office.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and that's it. So you'd hang out and chat. And so it's entirely different. Is it better or worse? I don't know. I think it would probably have been more difficult if you're seeking a different community. So, and thinking of different types of diversity. I mean, there wasn't even an acknowledgement of that. So you might have been very, very isolated and stuck in this community. I was happy in it, but I can see how it's not necessarily the best way, and how it can be much more powerful now to be able to seek out specific communities of support.
I like that you're touching on maybe a sense of diversity of, well, I get this from this group and I get this from that group, and kind of filling the spaces.
Yeah, I think I didn't meet my husband in graduate so I can speak to that a little bit. No, but I think it's true. When I was in my PhD, I lived and breathed my PhD, and I think we all did. And as you heard here, though, I didn't feel like I was isolated because I was surrounded by my friends. So it was exactly what everybody is touching on here. My friends and my colleagues and research, they were all the same thing, right? So it didn't feel like we were sacrificing anything to be there all the time. And you felt like you still had work-life balance because you're working with your friends and you go for a coffee together, and it was fine. I think for me, though, when it sort of brought more attention to the fact that there's more to life than doing my research, was when I actually went to do my postdoc. And I went to Austria first and imagine the culture shock of being in a place where they don't speak the language. And now I have to learn sort of a new environment. Where do I get what I need to do my experiment? And I have to now ask somebody who doesn't speak English how to do that. So that was a bit of a shock for me. And I also felt isolated because I'm with there's very few people from Canada there, right, in my institute. So it was like I was forced to go outside of my group, of my work colleagues, who are, by the way, for the first 3 months, any of you who have dealt with the German or Austrian culture will know that it can be very cold. But when they take you in, once you break that barrier, they're the most amazing people ever. But it can be that first 3 months of coldness where you're like, oh, I'm an Auslander. And so I had to go outside. So I found the expat community. Where did I find that? In an Irish bar. I will be fully transparent. So I sought out those people, and none of them had anything to do with science. And it was actually a refreshing break for me to realize, oh my gosh, I can do this over here, but then I can do this, and I can check it out the door, and I can have a lot of fun. And it actually was, I think it's what I needed to learn that I needed something else in my life other than, and that's where I met my husband, and he's Irish.
Yeah, I think similar themes. I think we're dating ourselves. So I'm 57 as well, just like we heard. And at the time, yeah, absolutely. There was no email, there was no communication. But when I actually came to do my grad studies, I moved from my hometown, which is in southern part of India, to New Delhi. different language, different culture. I didn't know the language, right? So there was a sense of isolation. It wasn't balanced by the fact that there were others like me who were also coming from other parts of the world, and then I could find that we all were in the same boat, right? And I know it seems strange now, but at the time, if I wanted to speak to my parents, I had to pre-arrange because there was one telephone in the building that could do calls outside the city. Right? So we had to pre-arrange our time when we would get 5 minutes in that phone to actually call outside the city and speak to my parents. Or we wrote letters. Seems so strange now. But we actually wrote letters and it took 10 days before that letter came back. They got it and they wrote back and they came back. But I think that gave you a sense of, if I reflect back, I think you realize a lot of that isolation, it comes from within, right? You don't have to feel isolated. You can find ways of not feeling isolated by making sure you make your connections. And now it's even more better because you can actually pick up the phone and talk to anybody. You can make those, and you set those opportunities for yourself and say that, yeah, I know I can do these 10 days because at the end of the 10 days, I'm going to get a letter, right? When my husband first moved to Canada and I was still in grad school, we only could speak to each other once in 15 days because it was extremely expensive. It costs $1 a minute. And I didn't have money to pay even for $1 a minute in Indian currency. And so he had to save for 15 days to speak to me, right? So, but how did you manage? Because you kind of built that in your framework that if this is the way I want to be, and I've committed myself to this journey, then I'm going to make it happen. I'm not going to feel isolated because that comes from within us saying that I'm going to feel isolated, right? You can find other ways of connecting with people. You can find other opportunities. And I think now there's so much more of that you could do. So never underestimate your resilience because each one of us is so resilient and we can make it happen, right? So never and there will be moments, I'm not saying we're all going to feel perfect every time. We're going to feel down. But it's okay, acknowledge that and try to move away from that, right? And then try to find what will make you feel that comfortable. And if it's a network outside, it's maybe chatting to somebody, it's maybe now in this environment, this is what I tell my children. If it is, if the social media will give you that, comfort, it's fine, but recognize that there is a limitation to it, right? Just because you're getting text messages may not give you the full, satisfaction as it would if you actually picked up the phone and spoke to your friend. So find those, things that really matter and mean to you and build with that. And each one of us is different, right? And I think as we moved out of our grad studies, it was much more easier to create a community around you, which is not your work. And when I look back, I feel it was much more important for me in my postdoc years and later on in early career to actually have a community outside work because it can get very difficult if you're all the time in the same work community and you face the same issues of your grants not being funded and your lab trying to get them cobble up the funds to keep your students. It can be very, very difficult to manage. So I found that it was much more important later on to build a more community around me than I did during my graduate studies because I was very happy with the science. Didn't have to worry about who's getting in the money to the lab, and I was happy with the friends I had. Right? So.
Wow. Just before we hear from Janice, I'm so struck by the power of that, the agency, that know yourself, and if you want community and networking, go seek those opportunities. And also just what both of you are speaking to in terms of like just this patience of like it takes time and accept that. Wow, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, change is not hard. Change is never easy. Okay, you have to. It's part of being an adult, right? And making things better. Like you just keep going through, and once you get through that discomfort, you're pretty much always going to be in a better place, right? No matter what it is. So for me, like all I really know is like research and science. Okay, that's a huge part of who I am. Huge. So when I was a PhD student in Guelph is a very university-oriented city, right? So when I felt like when I went there and I didn't know anybody, I did kind of two things. Because I was the only student in my prof's lab at the time, because, but even though I said that she may have not been a great career mentor, she was a good personal mentor. She was fun. It was a fun lab that we had, so we built that together. And when I felt that I needed to meet some new people, I joined the master swim team right? Which was dumb because it took me 20 minutes to get in the pool because I got chilly. Right? I still remember, oh. And then, but this is another thing that was actually very instrumental in my career that I never thought about until this moment, is that I actually joined the campus senate. They needed graduate students on there. And I was not like someone that really gravitated towards leadership things, but so I naively went in there because I thought, oh, I'll get to know people. Anyways, an important accidental stepping stone towards understanding maybe leadership in a very naive sort of way. But, you know, my academic community is really, even today, still really important. Because my husband's a scientist, he's a prof as well. So, you know, we would have joint lab parties and it was always in our thing. My friends tend to be in science or something like that. And sometimes we have very close friends and she's a professor as well. And my husband and I'll be in the car. And her husband is not a professor and not in science. And we'll be driving and we'll say, okay, when she starts talking about science or research, we're going to change the topic because her husband feels isolated. So what are our talking points? We'll talk about, I don't know, whatever. We'll make little things because I get that we can also feel sometimes intimidating, right, to some other people. And even though in our skin we don't feel that way at all, we're just like normal dudes, right? You know, I do the same dumbass things as other people, but it can, that label of, you know, can make other people maybe feel a bit intimidated. And that's something that I live in my family a little bit.
Oh,
right? You know, my other sister is a scientist in the US, my other sister's a school teacher, and I think it bothers her. I don't care. I'm very proud of her as a school teacher. Her job is probably a lot harder than mine many times, right? So I think there's that kind of thing. When I went to as a postdoc, I found that a very isolating experience as well, because you're doing the big change. You're really proud that you have that PhD. Okay, let me tell you, you're so proud of that PhD. And you think you're shit hot, right? You know, and then you go to the University of Pennsylvania and you're with all these other really brilliant postdocs from all over the world, from Czechoslovakia at the time, from Argentina, from other parts of the States, and I'm just like some loser from Canada, right? And I was and then you're no longer a student, so you have to pay adult bus fare, but you know, my salary was $18,000, right? So you have stuff to navigate. You're trying to, so these are things those were kind of challenging times, and so to have a network and have another life is perhaps good, but mine was always associated with the lab, to be really honest. And that's perhaps a weakness for me, is that I was very much science oriented. The hardest question in the list that you gave me was like personal things that be like, I like to read, I like to exercise, but I still feel like I have a life. I remember my students saying, oh, I don't want to be a professor because I want to have a life. I'm like, Jesus.
I love that. I like the comment that you mentioned about being uncomfortable. I saw this quote recently and it was saying how we often mistake fear for being in the wrong place, but it's actually just different. And oftentimes different is good because you're not doing what you always did. So thank you for that comment.
I do want to say something, if you're sorry to interrupt, because Melissa, you made a really good point about when you went to do postdoc in a different language, you talked about a different language, okay? So I got my job at Laval University and I didn't speak French that well, okay?
Wow.
Right? So my day is in French. I kind of forgot that I would be speaking English here, right? So for all of you people that think, you know, that you've got colleagues that speak different languages or have to speak in English or whatever, like, we all have to, nothing is easy. You know, like learning French was not easy. But would I be in this chair right now if I didn't do it? No way.
No, that's, I think, again, what you're speaking to, this fear and this uncomfortableness, and I'm so remarked to hear how like community filled your graduate experience has been. I would say that was a huge arc for me. I have felt very isolated at times in academia, But again, like this sitting with fear, this taking the time to identify a need and then still going for it, even though it's uncomfortable and hard. I think that is why we are also excited to hear about you, because that is so powerful and you get to bring that into every aspect of your life. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that. Kind of in that same vein of we were talking about grad school, I would love to talk about like early career now. So I think when we get to the end of our graduate studies, we're so excited to graduate, and I love how you mentioned that pride. But I think we kind of have a sense of we're paying it forward, like we're going to finish our PhD or do a postdoc, and then we're going to make it big and like get a good job. But how would you say you manage these expectations? Because that's not always maybe the case of the job market at the time, or maybe what you're looking for. I mean, I've heard that timing is really big. So yeah, how did you manage these expectations of like once you've gotten all your degrees?
Yeah. So, you know, very frankly, I don't know that I had any design to say, I'm going to do postdoc for X years, then I'm going to get a job, then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. Maybe it was very naive. All I knew is when I finished grad studies, I have to do a postdoc. So I looked around me and said, well, there's nothing interesting where I am. I'm going to go where the best researchers are, and I'm going to do a postdoc with the best researcher that I know in my field, right? So what I would say is that what strikes you when you start your postdoc is that journey is time limited, right? Because unlike grad studies, okay, instead of 6 years, you took 6.5 years, 5.5 years, it's okay. The postdoc is 2 years, 3 years, maybe max 4. You can't dwell ever in that, right? So that when that realization hits you, it is a little bit like, oh my God. And as Janice said, you do go to postdoc and you realize that nobody is going to be excusing your mistakes because you're a postdoc. You're expected to know everything. You may be doing a postdoc in something totally different than what you actually did your PhD. It's slightly different in terms of techniques and so on and so forth. But it's expected that you'll know the way, you'll know the next experiment, you're going to know where to go with it, right? Unlike, in a grad studies, you can actually depend on a lot of people to help you through that journey. So I think that is a shock to the system, and you again have to be open and transparent about it and think about it and say, okay, I have a limited time, what can I do? And the biggest thing I learned through that postdoc years is that in postdoc, you have to know to say, if this ain't working, I'm changing what I'm doing. Because you can't be stuck to doing the same thing and nothing comes in 3 years, because unfortunately, you're measured by what your output is. So if you started a line of research that absolutely isn't yielding anything, you have to let it go. It is yours, but you have to let it go and then find where can I, pivot and where can I take. And that's, in fact, a very useful learning as you progress your career, particularly for an academic career, right? Because when you become a supervisor, things you have to kind of see that, like, what's that fine balance of persisting and what's the fine balance of pivoting. And I think that was, one of the early lessons. And again, I was just thrown into a situation in my postdoc. I came in for my postdocs, wonderful supervisor, fantastic mentor. But unfortunately, within the first year of my postdoc, he actually passed away in a very shocking way. So the good news though was we were 3 postdocs in the lab, bunch of grad students, very well-funded lab. So, but overnight we had to the chair, can you keep the lab going because there's funding? Right? So they did allow us to do that, and then we were on our own to demonstrate. But that brought us together, and maybe some of us, from a postdoc, just leap forward to being the mentors for our students just because of necessity. And I don't wish that on anybody. But it's that, like when you're a postdoc, you have to also start thinking about, you've got also the responsibility to be a mentor to some of the grad students in your lab. And that's a learning for you as well, how to mentor and how to help them along. And you have to look out for yourself and say, am I really hitting what I need to, and, and making my publications come through and all of that, right? So I think it's that phase is probably very, very critical. I still don't think I had a very good clarity on where I'd land my first job, but I knew that I had to have something to show within 3 years, right? So I think that's then the doors open for you, and then you can look at what you want to do after that. But that's the phase I would say the postdoc years are more interesting for sure, but embrace it with open arms because it is challenging, but also again great opportunity for learning.
That's so true. Yeah.
I just have to say that even if you did have a very clear idea of what you wanted to do, I'm sure you didn't say, and if my advisor passes.
Yeah.
I'm saying that is like, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Life goes on for the rest of us. And you got, put it in your big pants. You're amongst the, you're amongst the most privileged people in the world. Use your privilege.
Do you wanna take it
Oh,
over this?
sorry.
No, no.
Well, so for me, I also, like I said, I didn't have an idea, but I'll tell you about a few bumps in the road. So when I was finishing my PhD, I did have an offer from Agriculture Canada to do something, to be kind of a research associate. I don't remember. There was like kind of a program and so I could have gotten a scholarship to be sort of a postdoc research associate there. And that was, that was sort of safer, right? I thought that could be really interesting. And then I got this offer as a postdoc in Philadelphia, right? Way scarier, way scarier. And it's just a gut thing, and I just, but it's so, So I went to Philadelphia. I have zero regrets, zero. Again, I would not be this chair if I had gone to the Ag Canada thing. And then when I was a postdoc, at the time, as I said, I was working on fertility, I was working in sperm and eggs, and I was in the medical school at the time. And in those days, right around my postdoc, all the infertility clinics in North America, there was a change to the regulatory change. They all had to have someone with a PhD as a scientific laboratory director. They had to have an MD as a clinical director, but they all had. So all of a sudden, people like me, everybody wanted someone like me to run their lab or to run the whole place, right? So I had calls from kind of all over, and and it's tempting because now it's much more big money than I knew at the time, right? We didn't know. I mean, now we know what these things. It was a new field of a new business at the time. And again, it was just a gut thing. It was like, what do you want to do? And I was lucky because when I was a postdoc, this is again, really lucky mentorship that I had. I had a good mentor as a postdoc, but also a scientist down the hall. She was she used to run the infertility clinic as well as do her own science, do her own research at the big university hospital. And everybody wanted to practice in vitro fertilization, right, in those days. But she only let me. I got to go for some reason, I don't know, but here's women helping women, right? She was the only woman, and now that I think about it, she was the only one there. But she helped, and so I got to do like 30, 35 cases with her on the weekends and things like this. And that was really helpful for me to kind of understand that I did not want to, that was just not, again, it was like stressful, it was different. Anyway, I just went with my gut and did not go down that path. And again, no regrets. Every now and then when I run into someone who's like got a really fancy car or whatever, but you know what, I'm very happy with my car. Fine. But it was kind of a gut thing.
Nice.
But anyways.
Joelle, do you want to comment on early career decisions?
Yeah, so, I like that vision of the train, and it felt kind of comfortable to be on. I also didn't have this like grand vision of where I'd be, I don't know. And there's so many circumstances that occur. Like, for example, if there's an economic crash and there's no funding, then maybe you'll go this way or that way, or there's a new fellowship program that comes up and that allows you. So you can't really plan for this. You're the age you are. You might go to a place that has more opportunities, or stay in the place where you are for all kinds of reasons. Could be family reasons. There's so many things to think of. So I just happened to bumble around and so I for family reasons, I decided to stay in Montreal to do my first postdoc. At the time, in biochemistry, it was normal to do 2 postdocs. It's just the way it was. I did my first postdoc, and I didn't have a fellowship yet, and so I was looking for somebody who had money. And there was a new professor, so during my interview, I was going to do protein NMR because protein NMR was going to blow crystallography out of the water. So happily, during the interview, which went well, said, but I have another idea that would be a side project. So this side project, he described to me, and it was about determining protein interactions and in cells and this and that. I said, well, like my PhD material could actually like be, you know, the way to, and that's what I did. I never did protein NMR, except the one time when he had a grant deadline and he said, quick, you know, run this spectrum of this protein because we need a figure in the grant. But apart from that, I never did it. And it ended up working out, you know, and so I had no idea that would, and it ended up opening doors for me to my second postdoc. I got fellowship, you know, but you can't plan. That was like a side project and an interview, that whatever. And it's so the idea of seizing opportunities, life takes you where it will sometimes, and where you allow it, you know, you have to be open. And so something that I kind of developed is, I guess, two mantras. Joelle, if you don't do it, nobody will do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is find your happiness. So when you're in a situation, to try to find your happiness within that situation, even if it's not what you would have chosen. So for all kinds of reasons, you know, like, for example, I chose to stay in Montreal for family reasons, but if it hadn't been for family reasons, I would have been exploring elsewhere, you know? So it wasn't necessarily my own personal first choice to stay there, but hey, I was there, so I found my happiness.
Mm.
And I think that's really important, to not harbor bitterness, but to, you know, make the best and to try to, you know, also bring people into that, I think is a good way forward.
I can feel your resiliency. Yeah.
Yeah, is it resiliency, or
Emanating
it's just, I guess it's a manner of resilience, but, you know, I never would have thought of it that way. It's just, it is what it is. And yeah, and I guess taking advantage of what bits of you can make into luck,
Mm-hmm.
even though it seems a little odd at the time.
Yeah, for me, I have to say, I didn't know that I wanted to do academia when I started my master's. I actually had a terrible master's experience, and I finished that. But I had a great mentor on my committee, actually, and he was like, you know, I don't think you should give up on this. I think you've got what it takes, but just don't let this bad experience define you. And then, so he was like, just at least try to work for a year or something like that. So I did that. I worked for a year in this lab in medical school, and the prof was amazing. And I realized, he came to me, I think it was 6 months into the job, and he was like, you work more than my graduate students. You're here at like, he's like, you practically live in the lab. He's like, why aren't you doing a PhD? And I was like, yeah, I guess I think I can do it now. Once I made that commitment, I was like, okay, I want to do academics. I want to be a prof. And then I was like, okay, how do I do that? And so I had to make sure that I set myself up in terms of having that CV that I think would have been important. That's where I brought up the leadership before, because I knew that was something that people would be looking for. But I have to say, like, my side project in my PhD became my passion. Mm-hmm. And when I searched for my postdoc, it was that I searched for my postdoc. But I was very calculated. I didn't like look for many people. I was like, there were literally, I think, 2 or 3 people in the world that I was interested in working with who worked in this area. One of them was on vacation, so didn't respond to me. The other one said, now my lab's full. And it was the third one that worked out. And that was the one in Austria. And I have to say, I'm glad I did that, because if you're not passionate about what you do, we're not doing it for the money, right? I think you hear that over and over. It's not about, you're not going to win the financial game here. It doesn't have to be that you have to live poor, though, don't get me wrong. But anyway, but that was great. And then my supervisor moved to Chicago. And that also gave me a lot of experience in moving a lab, setting up a lab from the ground up. We literally had to move across, across continents to do that. So that was a really great learning experience. My postdoc all in was about 5 years because of that year in the move. But I had CHR funding, and I think that also helped to build my CV toward that career path with academia. I will say, though, many of my friends, didn't work out that way. They also were thinking about academics, and it just, they for their projects either didn't give them the publication that they needed. They may not have had the mentorship. They didn't get to go to the international conferences so they could do that networking. So they had to find and adjust. And, you know, there are a lot of careers out there that don't mean that you're a professor, right? So where your PhD becomes very valuable. So talk to people. What do people end up doing? This is exactly what you need here. Look at all of us, right? We have, you're an agency, you know, we have a government, we have professors, like all of us have a similar kind of career path, and we all ended up in positions that I think we get to rely on our expertise, but it's not a professor always at the end. So it's just to say there's a lot out there.
I really like how you all seem to have this like self-trust in the unknown.
Yeah.
I think in maybe in science we're trying to find the unknown, and so
Yeah.
at least for me it's a little uncomfortable to sit in it. But I really appreciate the trust in yourself that how you navigated through that you're speaking to. Some of you actually kind of alluded to it. I was wondering in your decision making for your career and where you sought postdocs and first jobs, how did you decide what was important to you in terms of maybe you're leaving your family, a partner, a city, a community? So maybe Joel, you can start because you mentioned it. How did you find what was valuable to you, and how did that play into your decision making?
Right. So I mentioned that I stayed in Montreal for my first postdoc. So we had just married, and he wasn't finished his PhD. So I stayed. Then we went together for a second postdoc, which was very handy since by that time I had a baby. So, you know, we had decided to be a family unit. It was also essential because where I went didn't have much of a concept of daycare because women didn't need to work. Why would you work? Your husband has a job. This was Switzerland. Yes, where women got the right to vote in the last canton in 1993, I believe. And it was still by raising hands, which is difficult to be of a different opinion from your spouse, maybe. Anyways, yes. So very conservative, no female role models there. Actually, Frances Arnold, who won the 2018 Nobel Prize, refused a position at the ETH. She has 3 kids, and which Dawn Hilbert took that position eventually. So yeah, this all was happening around 1997, 98, 99. Things are moving somewhat, but yeah, you know, circumstances. It can be possible maybe if you have family support to do things otherwise, to decide, you know, to spend some time apart if you have a partner or not. Certainly the idea of the adventure, you know, we're so lucky in academic career. Travel is part of it. I love it. I love traveling. It's so like I go to places where I would never have gone on my own, and so it's such a privilege. And making friends. I have international friends I've only met at conferences, but we see each other, you know, every few years, and we connect, and they're really people I trust. You know, like my daughter was traveling at one point in some part of the world, and I wrote up to a conference. I said, "Can you keep an eye out for me?" You know. So yeah, I think I don't know. It's just choices, circumstances. I don't think there's anything right or wrong.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's really interesting. Like a lot of the decisions as to where to go for me, you know, it was molded, I would say, with time and experience. Like once I went to, when I was in Austria, by the way, there were 0 women that had held any kind of senior position. There was 1 as a junior, and that was it. And of course the head was like, you know, white male. It's nothing against white men, but we all know that there's bias there, right? That comes with that. So I realized it was the way that it was set up, the work atmosphere, it was a bit toxic. And that's what forced me into the Irish pubs, right? But it was like, I still remember we had like this fire alarm, and it was at midnight. I was there because I was doing something with my cells, and I was doing a time course. And 50% of the institute was there at midnight. So that's not work-life balance. And there was a lot of screaming and toxic behavior with mentors. Like, these were not mentors. These were tyrants, I would call them. So it was like, this is not where I want to be, and this isn't what I want to do. My mentor was fine, which is why I stuck it out. But once we went to Chicago, it exposed me to different mentorship styles, and I realized, oh, it was a little more academic. It's a weird place, University of Chicago. It's actually more graduate students than undergrads. And so there's a lot of very different kind of graduate students that you can kind of meet and come across and work with. And it's just to say that I was like, this is a little more my speed, is something where there's more students involved in the equation, and students ground us, right? You remind us of what it's like to be and experience things outside the research environment. And so I was like, yeah, I think I want to go out to a place where I get to be more and, interact with students more. And when I went on the job circuit, I really didn't apply to the big sort of research heavy institutions. I actually applied to more comprehensive schools because I wanted that interaction with students, and I wanted that better sort of what I would think would be better work-life balance. The US was not a possibility because my husband was not American. I was fine, but we realized it was going to be challenging for him. And this is back in the day, but because Irish, by the way, were the former terrorists that the US hated, right? So he struggled to get into the US. So yeah, things have changed a lot. Again, I'm kind of dating myself, but yeah, the US has always not been a very friendly place.
Yeah, I think, when you look back and in the choices you make, it's there's always life happening around you and the circumstances around you. For me, I think the mantra has been, okay, if you make a choice, then you make that choice work, right? But so take your time to make the choice, but you have to make the choice work. And then things might change and shift. So you have to, do that. And then the other part of it is, what's the value and what's your self-awareness of how much, what you would compromise and what you would not compromise, right? So for me, pursuing science and the passion was like foremost, right? So when I was, looking like who would be my partner, those were important to me. I needed to make sure that the partner I have or my spouse is going to be supportive of my science journey. And if that is not a value that they share, then that is not going to work, right? So you need to be aware of, what you will be ready, and always if you decide that you want to be in a relationship, because it's also okay. Maybe you don't want that. You want to be alone. Like, my brother, he is alone. He's 50 and happy, and that's what he decided for himself, right? So that's okay too. But I think you just have to decide on what do you want for yourself, and what are you ready to compromise, and what are the things that you don't want to compromise. And then in my case, because I've known the science journey, then we were in a partnership. We always knew that, we had to balance that out in terms of, sometimes I would compromise where we landed up, and other times he would compromise where we landed up, right? And that was the decision. So when after our postdoc, we were both looking for, we knew where we wanted to go, and we had some choices, but we were both looking, but we wouldn't know where we would actually get in. And way back again, we're dating ourselves. Now I think, many institutions are much more open to hiring couples. In those days, it was taboo. You didn't go to an interview and say, we are a couple and we are both looking for jobs. You didn't say that. Because then nobody got a job. And especially a woman, like if I got an interview and I went and said, I'm also looking for a position for my spouse, that would be the end of it, right? So that wasn't a choice. So we were more looking in terms of saying, okay, both of us, let us look at it. Depending upon what the best choice we get, one of us might have to compromise where we go. We may not necessarily compromise what we do, because we could still find in that city something that's of interest to us, but maybe we compromise where we go. So, he landed up having a very good job at Ottawa, so he came to Ottawa. And when I came to Ottawa, it took me a good maybe couple of years to find, what I liked. I went through a few positions, didn't like it, and till I found that this is what I wanted to do, and I found the opportunity at NRC to enter a research career that I wanted to pursue science, and that was lucky. But I had to be patient for those couple of years to try and see, and then once in that journey, as you raise a family, again, you have to be in a partnership, because now again it's a lot better. I mean, I was so happy I was just looking at the email last week from the Canadian Society of Immunology, and their annual conference, they are giving $500 grants to caregiving for whoever needs caregiving for that year,
Wow.
maybe for that duration of that conference. And this is fantastic, and I'm so proud we have come so far away that we can actually say this is legitimate need, right? And we can support that journey. But that wasn't the case then. So we had to, maybe rely on family, friends, find, interesting ways. But we also made the most of it because we were in science careers, we heard we could travel the world. So sometimes we took our kids along with us, right? And that was fantastic. One person would go to the conference and the other person was just there for the journey of it. Even though it was a conference we both could attend, the other one was just attending for the journey of it. So I think you can find, interesting ways to navigate it and then build kind of your society around you that you can rely on. So your spouse, but also other friends that, were like-minded, that you can lean on and rely on. And for me, maybe that was the most difficult, to say and feel vulnerable and say, I do need help. I do need help. And, and in a meeting, I would be in a meeting in the early days of my career, I remember, and at the time, it was all men around me, and I would have to say, guys, I need to call this off because I need to go pick up my kid. It was very, very difficult to say that, to get up and stand, because it felt like they just couldn't think I'm not really competent enough and I'm just walking away, right? So that takes a lot of courage, and I'm really pleased to see that, we are slowly shifting the paradigm on it, and we are allowing those conversations to occur in the workplace, which didn't happen 10, 15 years ago. So we're still not there. There's still a lot to do, but at least we are, have allies at work now that we can rely on, and finding those allies in work and, saying that. And this is a reality of life, right? I mean, I had my children in quick succession because by the time I had my first child, my biological clock was ticking. So I had it within the next year, I had my second child. And that's difficult in the workplace to tell people that I'm going to have two kids, one after the other. But we have to be bold enough to say that, because if we women don't speak up, nobody else will speak up for us. So I think, bringing yourself to do that is perhaps the biggest. And yes, I still, you said that, Janice, I still feel as an imposter sometimes, right? But you have to tell yourself, no, it's okay, I am going to do it, and build your courage and say that.
Thank you for speaking to that, because keeping what's important to you and finding your happiness, like you mentioned, I think that's so important. Janice, I would love to hear from you. We have about 10 minutes left, and I have 2 questions that I really want to get in.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. Okay, compromise is important, and I'm going to tell you right off that my husband followed me to postdoc. He followed me up to Quebec. That was not easy. We both struggled to learn French and everything, but he created, he should be actually speaker next year. He's really interesting and a great ally for women. Created research chairs for female colleagues and whatnot. So that's it. So he did that, but then the compromise comes in is when I was kind of at Laval and was being headhunted, and I had a couple of really interesting offers from other parts of other big universities across Canada, and he just wouldn't come. He was, he's like, and that's a slap in the face, right? But that's what partnership is about. Okay, that's marriage counseling, whatever. but whatever. The other thing that I wanted to say quickly, and that's okay. That's okay. And then I got this opportunity. Doors open, right? The doors open. And it was just like, aside from whatever. But in terms of being professor, I have to say, and even now, the traveling is super fun when you can do it with your family. My son, who's older than you guys probably, he's been all over the world with us, and that's been nice. As a professor, I never missed a Christmas concert or a doctor's appointment or a parent-teacher interview because I had that flexibility to do that. I was also hired as probably like the only Anglophone, the only woman in my department for ages. But I have to say that my male colleagues, as shitty as they were a few times, a few examples I could find, they were very supportive of me when I was pregnant. They were so excited for me. And they were wonderful. They were all wonderful dads themselves. And they would leave to take their kids to go figure skating and stuff, you know, so luck of the draw, maybe.
I want to keep the focus on, we have a really unique opportunity where we have, some funding and then also some academia. So I wanted to ask, what is something that, granting agencies wish academia knew? And then once you answer, I would love to hear what academia wished granting agencies knew.
Oh, yeah, we are not a bank. We are not a bank, and we also, as granting agencies, we have to justify the amount of money that I get. I get from the government, right? The government wants to know, why is this research? Why is fundamental research so important? Okay, so we need people like you, like labs, to say, thank you, FRQ, thank you, NSERC, thank you, CIHR, whatever. And this is what our fundamental research, and we need you guys to promote research to the public as well. Because it's not just going back to the minister or whatever, because the minister doesn't vote. Well, he votes or she votes, right? But it's the public. We need, and I think you guys are at the cusp of this, of a change. It's true that during the postdoc years that we do have our currency as publications, things like this, that won't change for the short term. But we're going to be starting to value, I think, a lot more outreach, things that are maybe not peer-reviewed publications, maybe doing entrepreneurship or something. These are all going to be we're going to start to talk about those more as, research results and impact. And because you know what, most of us here, unless you're with the foundation, our funding is public. It comes from our taxpayers. So we have to give back too. So that's a whole thing.
That's super helpful. That's actionable too, to promote. And so many of us are so passionate that it'll be fun. Thank you for.
So my situation is different. So we are not a funding agency. So NRC is actually a research performing agency, right? So we have research centers, 12 different research centers in every sector that you can imagine, from aerospace to construction to life sciences, right? So we are a research performing institution. However, we are publicly funded. The government of Canada provides funding to maintain our labs, keep the lights on, to update our equipment, to pay all the salaries of everybody from the scientists to the technical officers. So we are very privileged and fortunate that we get the funding from the government, but that means we're also accountable to ensuring that that funding is being used for the priorities that Canada needs. And so on an annual basis, as we have our appropriations, as we call it, the funding that is provided to us, we also have to evaluate as to, are we meeting what Canada needs in terms of science and Canada needs in terms of impact of the science. So we focus on the impact because we know, especially in the area of life sciences, if you think about it, previously when NRC is 100 plus years old, initially when NRC was created, the fundamental science was done within the walls of the government, and the government put the money into fundamental science. But then all our universities have come up, and a lot of fundamental science is being done in the universities. So the gap where a government is funding a research institution like us is to take the fundamental science and make sure that that fundamental science has an impact and is actually being taken up at the right place. If it's a public need, it's like public health. During COVID, we were doing things where we could push vaccines out, diagnostics out, or is helping industry take those and translate and have Canadian products made, right? So that journey needs to be justified on an annual basis, needs to be pivoted based on what all of you as taxpayers are saying that the government should be investing in. So we have to, always be responsive to that. Yes, we get to do cool things because we have great facilities and great opportunities to collaborate with the whole spectrum of things, I would say, because we can collaborate with universities, we can collaborate with industry, so we can collaborate internationally. So we get to do very cool things, but we cannot run away from the fact that whatever we do has to bring impact both in the short, medium, and long term. And as in the current role that I have, that's my primary job, to ensure that the work that my scientists are doing, I can articulate it as having impact, but also make them understand that they need to think about that while they actually propose a project. So one cool example of that is that, NRC has a national program. So we have a huge national program on bringing cell and gene therapies to Canada in an affordable and accessible way. So my scientists, 5 years ago, we launched the program. we're able to contribute to that vision, not by ourselves, but by collaborating with many universities across the nation to bring cell therapy to Canada from fully publicly funded system. So that's the opportunity you have, but it has to be always reflected upon from a responsibility you have, right? So it's not like, oh, you've got money, you can go do whatever you want. You always have to be accountable to what you do.
No, it's very nice to hear your voices because we're all on the other side of the application. So thank you for sharing. We have about 5 minutes, so if you guys want to do quick, and then there's one last.
Sure, I just want to echo, by the way, your voices are super important. I think, as you know, we're in funding crisis right now.
Yep.
The student voices that came together to get those scholarship values up was absolutely critical for that to happen. And that was heavy lobbying done across Canada. It was, you have a huge voice. There's a lot of voters amongst you. Right now, the funding rate, I don't know if you know, but the funding continues to decrease. And we are one of the worst countries in terms of spending per GDP. And I will say that even with these little small injections of cash that have come into the system, there's so little, too late, and get diluted almost immediately and require Treasury Board approval each year. And by the way, when we change governments, which is highly likely in a few months, they may not continue to approve those increases.
Quick, I'm part of a coalition, we can all be part of this,
Wonderful.
okay,
We need, it's just, I think and I think we can look to the south to see the muzzling that is already happening with those
not
scientists.
just there, New Zealand.
There you go. And we need to keep our voices. We need to scream to the rafters why we're important. But it's breaking the barrier of this really niche scientific language to impact. And I love that you brought that up because many of us don't understand, many of us, but outside this room don't fully understand what we're doing and why. So we need to impress upon people why that's important. But it's just to say that I think we're in crisis mode, and I'm going to use it for that rather than to say little nitpicky things about agencies. Because I think we can all agree there's better things. Things could be done a little bit better.
So advocacy is so important. Just to put a few numbers on it, and I don't want to discourage anybody who wants to go to academia, but the fact is that the startup grant for NSERC, for a new professor, the amount hasn't changed in the 25 years that I've been in business. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
How can it make sense? So I say that it's actually false because it has now, in the last few months, gone up from $25,000 a year plus $7,000. Okay, it gets you an extra summer student. So those are the numbers. It's really, it doesn't make sense. So advocacy is so important. It's also difficult because we're not trained for advocacy. We're not trained for all these hats that we're asked to put on. Even equity, diversity, inclusion, we're not experts, but we're being asked to fill all these pages and pages of how we're going to do. It's very difficult. There's a lot more responsibility that's being put on us to explain all this and express it. And it's hard to see the impact. The mention of Canada's spending is really underspending relative to our GDP. It's shocking. Last week I was in Germany. I was a member of a committee for the equivalent of our Tri-Council, so the equivalent of our NSERC, CIHR, and SHRC. So they have one funding agency in Germany, and it was for networks. So they fund these, they're called clusters of excellence. And so 25 researchers, it kind of looks a bit like our FQRT networks, except that the annual budget, and these are networks that are smaller than ours, 20 times the budget. I was crying as I'm and still we make do. We're doing fantastic work. We're doing terrific research. Publication rates for Canadian research are per dollar are, shockingly great.
Yeah.
So we can do it, but we need more money and we have to speak for it.
I'm just, quite remarked by that. Thank you for commenting on the realness of it, but also on how much power we have within ourselves to be better and do more. So thank you. I might cheat. We have 1 minute left, so maybe you could think of like a one-liner. I have 2 questions in one. What would something that you would wish your male coworkers maybe understood or took a moment to reflect on? And then maybe if you could tack on, but if you don't have time, don't worry, if you have a message for graduate students that either helped you through or that you wish you knew at the time. So maybe we can start with you and
I'll start with one thing. Allow women to grow old. And what I mean by that is that women are either young and they're kept, oh, she's young. Whereas men become rapidly established. But no, the woman is young. She's young. All of a sudden she's old. So allow women to be established.
incredible. Thank you.
I just wish my colleagues would be more cognizant of pushing women into those leadership positions. I find that they're happy to collaborate. And by the way, I've got lots of amazing male colleagues, so I just want to make that super clear. But when it comes to, say, putting team projects together, or when you're putting in those grant applications, when you're considering directorship, it's often the male is putting themselves forward. And it's not a detriment. They deserve to have leadership opportunities, absolutely. It's just sometimes they could say, but if I'm being given this, but there's also this amazing female colleague, maybe we could do it together. And it's how can we create opportunity rather than competing for opportunity. It shouldn't be either or. It should be like, how can we find these great roles for these amazing women? So I just wish we need the men, and I'm so delighted to see some of you here, by the way. Thank you so much. But because honestly, the change happens with not us, actually. It's you that are going to change. It's you giving us those opportunities and helping to lift us up. I'll say that. Thank you.
I'd say, one thing I would say was that, we need more allies in our men.
Yes.
But we also need them to understand that we just think differently. So it is often, if there is a position available or, a leadership position, it's just natural for us that we will not put ourselves up there. So we want our men to see beyond the obvious, right? So we did an analysis in our research unit a short while ago, and we realized if you look at project leadership, inevitably it is men, even though in terms of scientists in the organization, we are 50-50 now. So why is it that the women are not being project leaders? It's just because it's not obvious to men, right? Oh, they were a project leader for that project, so let's put them again as a project leader.
Exactly.
So they need to start thinking, under the hood, okay, beyond the obvious, and reach out differently to women, and this is true not only for women, to all our equity deserving groups. Reach out differently, because if you use the same metrics, the same manner in which, same methodology, this is an advertisement, an expression of interest, everybody just apply to it. Many equity deserving groups will not even apply to it. So you have to do it differently, have a dialogue, have conversations, encourage people, take a mentor under you. Mentor them. Be an ally means be a mentor. We actually, in our organization, have changed the role, the name mentor to sponsorship. What we mean is we want each one of our male colleagues to sponsor a woman colleague. That means sponsorship is more advocacy. It's not just giving ideas and go ahead and do it, but it's actually advocate for them. Bring them along with you and advocate for them. And I think that's what we want our allies to do. Just not say I'm an ally, but advocate actively for your colleagues. All of the groups that deserve equity, not just women.
Yeah, so my thing is that I've spoken a lot to women in STEM about women in STEM. I'm so happy to see the diversity of faces here today, because we need men to come to these events. And as women, we need to make the men feel welcome.
Yes.
They're not going to be yelled at for coming, right? And so we've made some mistakes as well, but we need to have the majority to agree for change to happen. And so really it's men need to be allies. My husband's an ally, but does he come to these things? No. And that's in my own house. Okay, we need men to come out and speak for us as well. Otherwise, nothing will happen.
I cannot thank you enough for your candor, for your vulnerability, and for sharing your stories here with us. I think that representation is so important, and each of you have given such an important voice. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who is here. We have some gifts for you. They are from like a local women-owned business.
So generous.
I just want to say it's actually a treat to be here. And I hope we'll have the chance to talk afterwards.
And then some closing remarks.
So this brings us to the end of the session. I would like to thank Dr. Bailey, Dr. Krishnan, Dr. Pickney and Dr. LGA for joining us. As we celebrate this UN Day of Women and Girls in Science, your expertise in innovative research, your passion for mentorship, and your progress make this event very both informative and inspiring for all the attendees. So once again, I would like to thank you for being an integral part of this event. So.
So much. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Lovely.
Can't get my girl, smells great. Oh.
Good job. Oh, I'm not supposed to be. No. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. So we can sit down, it'll help us.
nice. Yes.
Isn't it?
Oh,
Yes.
It's so good.
Smells great. I love it. Just, I take essentially oil every night in my shower, and so as I put my shower on, I put a few drops in the ground.
So relaxing.
Yeah, some of us is like so bad.